Carl Jung explains. The Mumbum 1. Reason you can't find real love. There is a kingdom within you that you have never seen, though you rule it with an iron fist wrapped in silk gloves. This is the realm where love is supposed to flourish. Yet here, in the most sacred chambers of the heart, we have erected the most elaborate theatre the world has ever known. Every morning, before the sun touches your skin, before your feet meet the cold floor, you are already reaching for the crown, that hollow crown of personas we call our identity in love. Listen closely now, for what I'm about to tell you may unravel everything you thought you knew about the way hearts meet in this strange dance we call relationship. The mask you wear when you love, or when you believe you love, is not merely a decoration. It is not the simple white lie we tell to be polite at dinner parties. No, this mask has become your face, grown into your very flesh, until you can know, longer tell where the performance ends and you begin. Jung knew this truth intimately, this peculiar alchemy by which the persona, meant to be a tool of social navigation, becomes the tyrant of the soul. He watched as countless individuals entered his consulting room, their eyes bright with the desperation of actors who had forgotten they were acting, who had played their roles so long that they believed their lines were the voice of their authentic self. And nowhere is this masquerade more pronounced, more devastating, than in the realm where two souls attempt to touch across the vast darkness of human separation. You have learned to love with your persona, not with your being. This is the first great tragedy of modern intimacy, that we bring our most polished, most acceptable, most carefully curated selves to the altar of vulnerability, then wonder why we feel so profoundly alone, even when wrapped in another's arms. We have confused the performance of love with love itself, the shadow of connection with connection, the echo of intimacy with the real and terrible beauty of being truly known. Think now of the last time you fell in love, or believed you did. Can you remember the moment when you first felt that electric recognition, not of the other person, but of how magnificently you could perform yourself in their presence? How quickly you assessed what version of yourself would be most appealing, most worthy of their attention and affection. How seamlessly you slipped into that role, like an actor stepping into costume, until even you believed in the authenticity of your portrayal. This is the hollow crown I speak of, the sovereignty we claim over our own hearts while ruling from behind an elaborate facade. We sit upon thrones built from the expectations of others, wearing regalia woven from our fears, of rejection, commanding kingdoms we have never truly inhabited, and from this false throne, we attempt to love and be loved, never understanding why the crown feels so heavy, why the palace feels so cold, why the subjects of our inner realm seem always to be rebelling against our rule. The persona in love is perhaps the most sophisticated psychological defense mechanism ever devised by the human psyche. It is not born from malice or conscious deception, but from that primal terror that lives in the deepest caves of every human heart, the fear that if we were to remove the mask, if we were to reveal the strange, contradictory, wounded, glorious mess of our authentic being, we would be met not with love but with recoil, not with embrace but with abandonment. So we perfect our performance. We learn to love with our achievements rather than our vulnerabilities, with our strengths rather than our struggles, with our light while hiding our shadow in the basement of consciousness. We become expert choreographers of the dance of courtship, knowing exactly which steps will earn applause, which gestures will evoke desire, which words will unlock the golden cage of another's affection. Yet in this exquisite performance, something essential dies, the very thing we were hoping to nurture and protect. The tragedy deepens when we realize that this is not a solo performance. Across from us, in this elaborate theater of relationship, stands another actor equally committed to their role, equally terrified of removing their mask, equally convinced that their performance is what makes them worthy of love. Two personas meet and mistake this collision for connection. Two carefully constructed identities attempt to merge while keeping their authentic selves locked away in separate rooms, each holding the key to chambers they dare not open. This is why so many relationships feel like parallel performances rather than genuine encounters. We are like two stage actors who have learned their lines so well that they can deliver them with perfect emotional authenticity, creating the illusion of deep communication while never actually speaking to each other. The lover and the beloved remain strangers, known only through their roles, understood only through their carefully crafted presentations of self. Jung called this the fundamental problem of individuation in relationship, that we cannot truly meet another until we have first encountered ourselves beneath the layers of persona we have accumulated. Yet relationship often becomes the very place where we most desperately cling to these false identities, because the stakes feel highest here, because the terror of rejection looms largest in the space where we long most deeply to be accepted. The hollow crown grows heavier with each passing year, each relationship where we achieve intimacy with someone else's persona while our own remains untouched, unknown, unloved. We begin to forget that there is anyone beneath the mask. We start to believe that the performance is the entirety of who we are, that the role we play in love is the sum total of our lovable qualities. The distinction between the authentic self and the persona blurs until we are like method actors who have lost themselves completely in their characters. But here is where the psychological wisdom becomes profound. The very weight of the hollow crown, the exhaustion of the endless performance, the loneliness that persists even in the midst of apparent intimacy, these become the doorways to awakening. The persona cannot sustain itself indefinitely. It requires constant maintenance, eternal vigilance, unceasing energy to keep the performance alive. And eventually, something in us begins to rebel against this tyranny of the false self. This rebellion often begins as a whisper, a nagging sense that something is not quite right in the kingdom of our hearts. We find ourselves wondering why love feels so effortful, why intimacy seems to require such careful management, why we feel most alone when we are trying hardest to connect. We begin to sense that beneath the elaborate costume of our lovable self lies someone we have never properly met, someone who might be worthy of love not because of their performance, but because of their simple, irreducible existence. The hollow crown begins to crack under its own weight. The persona, meant to be a flexible tool of relationship, has become a rigid prison. And in the cracks, something beautiful begins to emerge. Not the polished, acceptable self we have presented to the world, but the raw, unvarnished truth of our being, complete with all its contradictions, shadows, wounds, and unexpected magnificence. This is where the journey begins, in the recognition that what we have called love has often been merely the intersection of two elaborate illusions. Two careful performances, two hollow crowns clinking together in the darkness while the true kings and queens of our inner realms wait in exile, longing to be discovered, longing to meet across the terrible and beautiful space where authentic souls recognize each other, without need of costume or script. The dissolution of the persona in love is not a tragedy. It is the birth of possibility. For only when the hollow crown finally crumbles can we discover what it truly means to love and be loved not for who we pretend to be, but for who we actually are in all our strange, contradictory, utterly human glory. This is the beginning of real relationship, the first step in the long journey from performance to presence, from persona to authentic being, from the hollow crown to the sovereign self that has been waiting beneath it all along, patient as earth, enduring as stone, ready to love and be loved without disguise or defense. The kingdom you have ruled from behind your mask is about to be transformed. The revolution has already begun in the quiet chambers of your heart, where something real and wild and true is stirring, ready at last to claim its rightful throne. There is a moment, perhaps you have lived it, when you look across a crowded room and your soul recognizes something it has never seen before. The heart quickens, the breath catches, and in that electric instant, you believe you have found your other half. But what if I told you that in that sacred moment of recognition, you were not seeing them at all? What if, instead, you were gazing into the most sophisticated mirror your psyche has ever constructed, one that reflects not their essence, but the deepest, most hidden chambers of your own being? This is the cruelest deception of all. The way we fall in love not with another human being, but with our own reflection distorted and made beautiful in their unsuspecting eyes. We call it chemistry, magnetism, fate. Jung called it projection. And in the labyrinth of the heart, it is both the source of our greatest ecstasy and our most profound suffering. Consider the lover who sweeps you off your feet with their mysterious silence. You interpret their quiet as depth, their distance as allure. You fill their silence with symphonies you have never heard, compose entire conversations from their glances, build cathedrals of meaning from their smallest gestures. The anima appears as the eternal feminine, the muse, the goddess, the enchantress, who holds all the mystery and emotional depth you have denied in yourself. She is Beatrice to your Dante, leading you through the circles of your own underworld. She is the woman who seems to understand your soul's language without words, who moves through the world with a grace you have only dreamed of possessing. In her presence, you feel more alive than you have ever felt, because through her, you are finally witnessing the unlived aspects of your own nature. The Animus manifests as strength, as clarity, as the decisive force you have never allowed yourself to embody. He is the protector, the wise king, the adventurer who fears nothing. In his presence, you feel safe not because he will shield you from the world, but because in him you recognize the warrior you have never allowed yourself to become. He carries your unlived courage, your unexpressed power, your buried authority. But here lies the tragedy. You are not loving them. You are loving your own potential, your own disowned aspects, your own unlived life given form and breath in another's body. They become the unwitting screen upon which you project the movie of your own becoming. And they, poor souls, can never live up to the divinity you have bestowed upon them, for they are merely human beings carrying the impossible burden of your own completeness. This is why the beloved often seems so perfect in the beginning, so luminous with possibility. They are not bound by the limitations of reality because they exist primarily in the realm of your imagination. You have made them the carrier of everything you believe you lack, everything you long to become, everything you have refused to develop within yourself. They are your personal savior, your key to wholeness, your ticket to the life you have never dared to live. The woman projects her unlived ambition onto her lover's career, living vicariously through his successes while her own dreams gather dust. The man projects his emotional depth onto his beloved's tears, feeling profound through her feelings, while his own heart remains locked away. We make our partners the repositories of our shadow selves, asking them to live out the aspects of humanity we have deemed too dangerous, too vulnerable, too powerful for us to claim. But projection is a hungry ghost that can never be satisfied. The more intensely we project, the more desperately we need the other to conform to our vision of them. We begin to sculpt them, to demand that they remain frozen in the image we have created. We fall in love with their potential, but only the potential that serves our projection. When they grow in directions that threaten our fantasy, we call it betrayal. When they reveal their authentic humanity, their flaws, their limitations, their own complex inner world, we experience it as abandonment. The mirror begins to crack. The perfect lover starts to show their human face. They have needs of their own, dreams that don't include you, ways of being that contradict the story you have written about them. The Anima reveals herself to be not a goddess, but a woman with morning breath and unpaid bills. The Animus shows himself to be not a hero, but a man with fears and doubts, and the need to be held sometimes. This is the moment of disillusionment, not because they have changed, but because you are finally seeing them instead of yourself. The falling in love was a falling into your own projection. The falling out of love is the withdrawal of that projection, leaving behind two actual human beings who must decide whether they can love each other without the beautiful lie of perfect completion. Some relationships cannot survive this transition. They were built entirely on projection, on the mutual agreement to carry each other's unlived lives. When the projections withdraw, there is nothing left but two strangers who have been using each other as mirrors. The devastating recognition arrives. You never knew each other at all. You were both in love with fantasies, with projections, with the promise of becoming whole through another. But projection serves a purpose beyond mere self-deception. It is the psyche's way of showing us what we need to reclaim within ourselves. Every quality you have projected onto your beloved is a quality seeking integration within your own being. The Anima and Animus are not meant to be found in others. They are meant to be discovered, developed, and integrated within the landscape of your own soul. The woman who projects her Animus onto powerful men must learn to cultivate her own authority, her own decisive strength, her own capacity for leadership and protection. The man who projects his Anima onto mysterious women must develop his own emotional intelligence, his own capacity for depth and intuition and creative expression. The projection is a roadmap to your own becoming, if you have the courage to read it correctly. This is the paradox of love. We are drawn to others not because they complete us, but because they show us what we need to complete within ourselves. The beloved becomes the teacher who reveals our own unlived potential. They are the mirror that shows us not who they are, but who we are meant to become. True love begins where projection ends. It begins when you can see your beloved not as the carrier of your dreams, but as a complete human being with their own journey of becoming. It begins when you stop asking them to be your salvation and start taking responsibility for your own wholeness. It begins when the Anima and Animus return home to the inner landscape where they belong, no longer exiled into other bodies, but integrated into the fullness of your own being. This is why the path of love is ultimately the path of individuation. Every relationship is a workshop in consciousness, an opportunity to reclaim the aspects of yourself you have projected onto others. Every disappointment in love is an invitation to develop within yourself the qualities you have been seeking outside yourself. Every heartbreak is a call to wholeness. The cruelest deception becomes the most merciful teacher. The mirror that showed you false reflections eventually reveals the truth, that everything you have been seeking in another has always lived within you, waiting to be recognized, developed, and integrated. The beloved who seemed to carry your missing pieces was simply showing you where the treasure was buried in your own soul. And perhaps this is the deepest purpose of projection, not to deceive us, but to awaken us, to show us through the painful beauty of impossible love that the journey home was always an inner journey, that the beloved we seek in the world is ultimately the beloved we must become for ourselves, that the Anima and Animus are not meant to be found in others, but married within the sacred chamber of our own hearts. When you can love your own Anima, when you can honor your own Animus, when you can embrace both the feminine and masculine principles within your own being, then, and only then, can you meet another human being in the clear light of authentic love, not the love that seeks completion, but the love that celebrates wholeness, not the love that projects, but the love that sees, not the love that demands, but the love that liberates. This is the love that waits on the other side of projection's cruel deception. The love that recognizes itself in the eyes of another, not as a reflection, but as a recognition. The love that says, I see you, not as my missing piece, but as a complete being whose journey of becoming is as sacred as my own. The love that honors the mystery of the other without trying to solve it, that witnesses their becoming without trying to direct it. The mirror breaks, the projection withdraws, and in that moment of clarity, love is finally free to be itself, not a need masquerading as devotion, not a hunger dressed up as affection, but the simple recognition of one complete being, honoring another complete being on the endless journey toward becoming whole. In the depths of every human heart lives a hungry ghost, feeding on the very qualities we have banished from our conscious lives. This ghost has a name. Jung called it the shadow, and it moves through our relationships like a skilled puppeteer, orchestrating the dance of attraction and repulsion with invisible strings. What we cannot bear to see in ourselves, we compulsively seek in others, then recoil from in horror when they dare to show us our own reflection. The shadow is not evil, though we have made it so. It is simply the repository of everything we have decided we cannot be. If you were raised to be good, your shadow carries your capacity for wildness. If you were taught to be strong, your shadow holds your vulnerability. If you learn to be rational, your shadow contains your emotional chaos. If you were trained to be selfless, your shadow harbors your fierce selfishness. Every quality you have rejected in yourself becomes a citizen of this underground kingdom, growing stronger in darkness, more desperate for expression. And how does this disowned part of you seek the light? Through others, through the magnetic pull toward those who embody what you have refused to claim. The shadow does not simply observe, it actively creates the circumstances of your romantic life, drawing you toward people who will serve as unwitting actors in its drama of integration. Watch how it operates. The woman who prides herself on being rational and controlled finds herself inexplicably drawn to passionate, unpredictable men. She calls it chemistry, but it is really recognition, her shadow recognizing its own emotional wildness in another's expression. The man who has built his identity on being the good guy, the reliable one, the saint, finds himself obsessed with the bad girl, the one who breaks all the rules he has spent his life following. His shadow is hungry for the rebellion he has never allowed himself to taste. The shadow's hunger is relentless. It will create scenarios where you must encounter what you have disowned. It will draw you into relationships that force you to confront the very qualities you have spent your life denying. The controlled person will be magnetized by chaos. The chaotic person will be drawn to rigid structure. The giver will be attracted to the taker. The taker will be pulled toward the giver. Always, the shadow seeks its missing piece in another's embodiment. But here is where the shadow's kiss becomes a curse. What initially attracts us in others often becomes what we most despise about them. The passion that drew you to your wild lover becomes the recklessness that destroys your sense of security. The stability that attracted you to your grounded partner becomes the rigidity that suffocates your spirit. The very qualities that magnetized you in the beginning become the battleground where your relationship dies. This is not coincidence. It is the shadow's inevitable revelation. In the honeymoon phase, we can project our disowned qualities onto others and enjoy them vicariously. We can be wild through our passionate lover, stable through our grounded partner, rebellious through our rule-breaking beloved. But eventually, these qualities demand recognition not as foreign traits in another, but as aspects of our own unlived nature. When this recognition begins to dawn, the shadow's kiss becomes a battle cry. We find ourselves in endless fights that seem to be about dishes or money or whose turn it is to call, but are really about much deeper territories of the psyche. We are fighting our own disowned aspects, projected onto our partner's behavior. We are at war with our own shadow, using our beloved as the battlefield. The woman who has never allowed herself to be selfish finds herself enraged by her partner's self-care, calling it narcissism. But what she is really fighting is her own unlived capacity for healthy selfishness, for honoring her own needs instead of always serving others. The man who has never permitted himself to be vulnerable finds himself contemptuous of his partner's tears, calling them manipulation. But what he is really rejecting is his own unexpressed emotional depth, his own need to be held and comforted. This is the shadow's cruelest trick. It makes us hate in others what we most need to develop in ourselves. We become expert at spotting our own disowned qualities in our partners, but blind to their presence within our own psyche. We can analyze their selfishness, their weakness, their chaos, their rigidity with surgical precision, while remaining completely unconscious of these same qualities living within us. The shadow relationship becomes a prison where two people are locked in eternal combat with their own reflections. Each partner becomes the keeper of the other's disowned aspects, and the relationship becomes a perpetual mirror showing us everything we have refused to see about ourselves. We love and hate our partners for the same reasons, because they carry the shadow we have cast off, and their very existence reminds us of our own incompleteness. Some relationships are built entirely on this shadow dance. They exist in a state of constant tension, where the partners are unconsciously performing their shadow roles for each other. The responsible one enables the irresponsible one. The victim enables the aggressor. The saint enables the sinner. Each person gets to remain unconscious of their own shadow by focusing on its manifestation in their partner. These relationships often have an addictive quality because they provide a constant external drama that keeps us from having to face our own internal conflicts. We become shadow addicts, drawn to relationships that allow us to avoid the work of integration by projecting our disowned aspects onto others. We prefer the familiar chaos of fighting our shadow externally to the unfamiliar peace of embracing it internally. But the shadow's kiss can also be a gateway to transformation. When we begin to recognize that our most intense reactions to our partners are actually reactions to our own disowned aspects, the real work of individuation can begin. Every quality that triggers us in another is an invitation to examine our own psyche for its presence. Every fight becomes a roadmap to our own unconscious material. The woman who rages at her partner's selfishness can ask herself, where in my life do I need to be more selfish? Where do I deny my own needs in service of others? How can I develop healthy self-care instead of projecting my resentment onto my partner? The man who is disgusted by his partner's emotionality can inquire, where have I cut myself off from my own feelings? How can I develop my emotional intelligence instead of rejecting it in others? This is the shadow's ultimate gift. It shows us exactly what we need to integrate within ourselves. Every quality we compulsively seek or reject in others is a quality seeking recognition within our own being. The shadow relationship becomes a mirror of our own psychological development, showing us precisely where our work lies. The integration of the shadow is not about becoming everything we have avoided being. It is about reclaiming the capacity for wholeness, for containing contradictions, for being complex rather than simple. It is about developing the flexibility to be both strong and vulnerable, both giving and receiving, both structured and spontaneous as the situation requires. When we begin to own our shadow, the obsessive quality of our attractions begins to shift. We are no longer desperately seeking our missing pieces in others because we are developing them within ourselves. We are no longer repelled by certain qualities in others because we have made peace with their presence in our own nature. We can appreciate passion without needing to possess it through another, We can value stability without requiring it from our partner. This is when love becomes possible, not as a hunger for completion, but as a celebration of wholeness, not as a battle against our own shadows, but as a dance with our own complexity. We can love others for who they are, rather than for what they represent of our own unlived nature. We can be triggered by their behavior without making it about our own psychological wounds. The shadow's hungry kiss becomes a blessing when we learn to feed it not through others, but through our own willingness to be complete. When we can embrace both our light and our darkness, our strength and our weakness, our nobility and our pettiness, then we no longer need others to carry our disowned aspects. We can meet them as equals in the journey of becoming whole. The relationships that survive this shadow integration often become the most profound partnerships, built not on the projection of missing pieces, but on the recognition of two whole beings choosing to journey together. They become laboratories of consciousness, where both partners can continue to discover and integrate their own shadow material, supporting each other's growth rather than enabling each other's unconsciousness. And perhaps this is the shadow's deepest purpose, not to create drama in our relationships, but to force us into the very encounters that will make us whole. Every shadow relationship is an invitation to reclaim what we have lost of ourselves. Every fight is a call to integration. Every trigger is a doorway to self-discovery. The shadow's kiss may taste bitter at first, the recognition of our own darkness, our own contradictions, our own human complexity. But it is also the kiss that awakens us to our own wholeness, that calls us home to ourselves, that reminds us that we are not the simple, one-dimensional beings we have pretended to be, but complex, multifaceted souls capable of containing the full spectrum of human experience. When we finally learn to kiss our own shadow, we no longer need to taste it on another's lips. Deep within the chambers of every adult heart lives a child who has never stopped waiting. This child carries the original blueprint of love, not as it was received, but as it was desperately needed and never found. This orphaned aspect of our being does not grow older with the years. It remains frozen in time, clutching the same wounds, speaking the same silent prayers, orchestrating our adult relationships from the shadows of memory. We call our romantic patterns chemistry, compatibility, or cosmic connection. But look closer, and you will find something far more primitive at work: the wounded child's relentless attempt to complete the unfinished business of early love. Every relationship becomes a stage upon which this inner orphan performs the same tragic play, hoping this time the ending might be different, this time the love might finally come home. The templates were written early, carved into the neural pathways of your developing brain before you had words for what was happening to you. If love came with conditions, you learned that acceptance must be earned. If love was absent, you learned that you were somehow unworthy of it. If love was overwhelming and intrusive, you learned that intimacy meant the death of self. If love was unpredictable, swinging between warmth and coldness, you learned to scan constantly for signs of impending abandonment. These early experiences did not simply influence your capacity for relationship. They became the invisible architecture of your romantic life. The child who was criticized learned to seek partners who would continue the familiar song of judgment. The child who was abandoned learned to choose lovers who would inevitably leave. The child who was controlled learned to be drawn to possessive partners who would recreate the claustrophobic embrace of home. But here lies the mystery. Why would we actively seek what wounded us? Why would the orphaned heart gravitate toward the very experiences that caused its original pain? The answer lives in the strange logic of the unconscious, where familiar suffering feels safer than unknown joy. The wounded child within us would rather relive known pain than risk the terror of unknown love. This is the orphaned heart's cruel wisdom. It knows how to survive abandonment, but it doesn't know how to navigate genuine intimacy. It knows how to endure criticism, but it does not know how to receive authentic praise. It knows how to perform for love, but it does not know how to simply be loved. So it creates relationships that feel familiar, even when familiar means painful. Watch how this plays out. The woman whose father was emotionally absent finds herself drawn to unavailable men, married men, distant men, men who are physically present but emotionally elsewhere. She calls it bad luck, but her orphaned heart is following an ancient script. It knows how to yearn for love that never fully arrives. It knows how to survive on crumbs of attention. It does not know how to digest the full meal of available present love. The man whose mother was intrusive and overwhelming finds himself magnetized to partners who demand complete fusion, who need to know where he is every moment, who interpret his need for space as rejection. He calls it passion, but his orphaned heart recognizes the familiar dance of suffocation and escape. It knows how to rebel against engulfment. It does not know how to breathe freely in the presence of healthy boundaries. The child who learned that love meant walking on eggshells around an unpredictable parent becomes the adult who seeks partners with volatile emotions, who keeps everyone guessing about their moods and needs. They call it excitement, but the orphaned heart is simply creating the familiar landscape of hypervigilance, where love must be earned moment by moment and can be lost without warning. These patterns run so deep they feel like destiny. We tell ourselves stories about being unlucky in love, about always choosing the wrong people, about love being inherently painful or complicated. But we are not unlucky. We are unconscious. We are not choosing wrong people. We are following the orphaned heart's GPS, which always leads back to the scene of the original crime. The tragedy is that we often mistake the intensity of familiar wounds for the depth of true love. The racing heart, the obsessive thoughts, the emotional roller coaster, these feel like passion, but they are often just the orphaned heart's recognition of familiar territory. We confuse the activation of old trauma with the stirring of new love. We mistake the reopening of ancient wounds for the opening of the heart. Meanwhile, when genuinely healthy love appears, steady, available, consistent, it often feels boring to the orphaned heart. There is no drama to navigate, no wounds to heal, no impossible love to chase. The orphaned heart does not know what to do with love that simply shows up day after day without conditions or complications. It feels too easy, too good to be true, too foreign to trust. This is why healing our capacity for love requires more than finding the right person. It requires healing the orphaned heart within ourselves. It requires going back to those early templates and rewriting them with the wisdom of adult consciousness. It requires recognizing when we are being driven by the wounded child's agenda and choosing instead to respond from our mature, integrated self. The process begins with recognition. When you find yourself in the same relationship dynamic for the third or fourth or 10th time, when you realize you are attracted to the same type of person who consistently disappoints you in the same way, the orphaned heart is trying to get your attention. It is not sabotaging your happiness. It is desperately trying to heal the original wound by recreating it with someone who might, this time, love it back to wholeness. But this is the orphaned heart's fundamental misunderstanding. Healing does not come from others. No partner, no matter how loving, can go back in time and give your inner child the perfect parents it needed. No relationship can undo the original wounds or fill the primal voids. The love you needed as a child can only be given now by the adult you have become. This is the most radical act of self-love, becoming the parent your inner child never had. Learning to speak to your wounded aspects with the compassion they always deserved. Learning to provide the consistency, the safety, the unconditional acceptance that were missing in your early experience. Learning to reparent yourself with infinite patience and tenderness. When you begin this inner work, your external relationship patterns start to shift. You no longer need partners to carry your unhealed wounds. You no longer need to recreate familiar pain to feel at home in love. You can begin to recognize genuine availability, authentic kindness, real consistency, not as boring or suspicious, but as the precious gifts they are. The orphaned heart begins to heal when it realizes it is no longer orphaned. It has found its way home, not to another person, but to the conscious, loving adult who can finally provide what was missing. The inner child that was wounded in relationship can be healed in relationship, not with another person, but with the mature self that has learned how to love without conditions. This does not mean we no longer need others. It means we no longer need others to complete us, to heal us, to save us from our own history. We can choose partners not from the desperate need of the orphaned heart, but from the fullness of the integrated self. We can love not to fill our voids, but to share our wholeness. Relationships built on this foundation have a completely different quality. They are not about healing old wounds, but about celebrating the wholeness that comes from having done that inner work. They are not about finding your missing half, but about two complete beings choosing to create something beautiful together. They are not about recreating familiar patterns, but about exploring new possibilities for intimacy and growth. The orphaned heart's journey is ultimately a journey home to itself. Every failed relationship, every repetitive pattern, every familiar wound reopened is the inner child's way of saying, "Please see me, please heal me, please give me the love I have always needed." When we finally hear this plea and respond with the compassion of the mature self, the endless search for love outside ourselves can finally come to rest. The child within stops waiting for someone else to save it. The orphaned heart discovers it was never truly orphaned. It was simply waiting for the adult self to come home and claim it as beloved. And in that moment of recognition, of integration, of self-compassion, the capacity for real love is finally born. Not the desperate love of the wounded child, but the secure love of the integrated adult. Not the love that seeks to heal old wounds, but the love that celebrates present wholeness. Not the love that recreates familiar pain, but the love that dares to explore unfamiliar joy. We live our lives inside stories that were written long before. We were born, breathing life into scripts that were authored by the collective unconscious of our time. These are not our stories, yet we inhabit them as if they were gospel truth. Nowhere is this more evident than in the mythology we have created around romantic love. A mythology so pervasive, so seductive, so beautifully crafted that we mistake it for reality itself. This mythology tells us that love should be effortless, that the right person will complete us, that passion should never fade, that conflict means incompatibility, that if we have to work at love, then it must not be real love. It whispers that somewhere out there is our perfect match, our soulmate, our other half who will make all our struggles disappear and all our dreams come true. It promises that true love conquers all, that it requires no maintenance, no negotiation, no conscious effort, that it simply is pure and perfect and eternal. These stories live in the air we breathe, transmitted through every romantic comedy, every love song, every fairy tale, every advertisement that promises fulfillment through finding the right relationship. They are embedded in the architecture of our social media, where relationships are performed rather than lived, where highlight reels masquerade as authentic intimacy. They echo in the voices of well-meaning friends and family who ask why we are still single, who suggest that we are incomplete without a partner, who treat our relationship status as a measure of our success as human beings. But these stories are not neutral. They are not harmless entertainment or innocent inspiration. They are the bars of a gilded cage that keeps us imprisoned in expectations that no human relationship could ever fulfill. They create a standard of romantic perfection that ensures our actual relationships will always fall short, will always disappoint, will always feel like failures compared to the glossy ideal. Consider the mythology of effortless love. In this story, the right relationship requires no work, no compromise, no difficult conversations. Love flows like a river, natural and unobstructed. Partners understand each other without words, anticipate each other's needs, never disagree about anything significant. This mythology tells us that if we have to try, if we have to negotiate, if we have to work through conflicts, then we must be with the wrong person. But this is perhaps the most destructive lie of all, because it prevents us from developing the skills that real relationships require. When we believe love should be effortless, we interpret effort as evidence of failure. When we encounter the inevitable conflicts that arise when two complex human beings attempt to build a life together, we assume this means we are incompatible, rather than recognizing it as the raw material of intimacy. The mythology of completion tells us that we are inherently incomplete beings seeking our missing half. It suggests that we are broken puzzles requiring the right piece to make us whole, that we are wounded souls needing another person to heal us. This story creates relationships built on need rather than choice, on desperation rather than abundance, on the fantasy that another person can do for us what we must ultimately do for ourselves. When we believe we need another person to complete us, we place an impossible burden on our relationships. We ask our partners to be our therapist, our parent, our best friend, our lover, our entertainment, our meaning, our purpose, our salvation. No human being can carry this weight. No relationship can bear the pressure of being someone's entire world. The mythology of eternal passion promises that real love never fades, that desire should burn as brightly in year 20 as it did in week 2, that true lovers never stop feeling butterflies when they see each other. This story sets us up for inevitable disappointment because it mistakes the temporary neurochemical cocktail of early attraction for the deeper, more sustainable intimacy that develops over time. When the initial passion naturally evolves into something more stable and secure, we panic. We interpret this as evidence that the love is dying rather than recognizing it as love maturing. We chase the high of new romance instead of learning to appreciate the profound intimacy that comes from truly knowing and being known by another person over time. The mythology of conflict-free harmony suggests that compatible partners never fight, never disagree, never have to work through differences of opinion or desire. In this story, conflict is the enemy of love, a sign that two people don't belong together. But this mythology confuses conflict with combat, disagreement with disconnection, difference with incompatibility. Real intimacy requires the courage to be authentically yourself with another person, which inevitably means revealing aspects of your personality, your values, your needs that may not align perfectly with your partner's. The ability to navigate these differences with respect and curiosity, to find creative solutions to conflicting needs, to maintain love in the presence of disagreement, these are the skills that create lasting relationships. But the mythology teaches us to run from conflict instead of learning to dance with it. Perhaps most insidiously, these mythologies create what Jung would call a cultural complex, a shared unconscious pattern that possesses entire societies. We are all infected with the same impossible expectations about love, all measuring our relationships against the same unrealistic standards, all feeling like failures when our human partnerships fail to match the divine perfection promised by the collective story. This complex manifests in the epidemic of relationship anxiety that plagues our modern world. We are constantly scanning our relationships for signs of imperfection, constantly comparing our inner experience to the curated images we see around us, constantly wondering if we are with the right person or if there is someone better out there waiting for us. The mythology has made us chronically dissatisfied with the good enough love that is actually the foundation of lasting partnerships. The complex also shows up in our inability to commit deeply to the relationships we have. When we believe that perfect love exists somewhere out there, every flaw in our current relationship becomes evidence that we have settled, that we are missing out on our true destiny. We live in a state of perpetual maybe, always keeping one eye on the exit, always wondering if the grass might be greener on the other side. This is the cruel irony of the romantic mythology. In promising us everything, it delivers nothing. In teaching us to expect perfection, it makes us incapable of appreciating the imperfect beauty of real human love. In convincing us that we deserve fairy tale romance, it blinds us to the profound magic that exists in ordinary, committed, grown-up relationships. The way out of this gilded cage is not to reject love itself, but to reject the mythology that has distorted our understanding of what love actually is. Real love is not effortless. It is the most challenging and rewarding work we will ever do. Real love does not complete us. It invites us to become complete within ourselves. Real love does not eliminate conflict. It provides a safe container within which conflicts can be transformed into deeper understanding. Real love is not a feeling that happens to us, but a choice we make every day. It is not about finding the perfect person, but about learning to love imperfectly with an imperfect person in an imperfect world. It is not about never having problems, but about choosing to face problems together rather than running away when things get difficult. When we release ourselves from the prison of impossible expectations, we become free to experience the love that is actually available to us. We can appreciate our partner's humanity instead of resenting their imperfections. We can celebrate the ordinary moments of connection instead of waiting for constant peak experiences. We can find meaning in the daily choice to show up for each other instead of seeking transcendent bliss. This is perhaps the greatest act of rebellion in our romance-obsessed culture, choosing to love realistically rather than mythologically. Choosing to build relationships based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine compatibility, rather than on the promise of completion or perfection. Choosing to do the unglamorous work of learning to communicate, to negotiate, to forgive, to grow together over time. The gilded cage of expectations may be beautiful, but it is still a cage. Freedom lies in stepping outside the collective mythology and discovering what love looks like when it is liberated from impossible demands. Freedom lies in accepting that we are not characters in a romantic movie, but real human beings capable of creating our own authentic love stories. These stories may not have the glossy perfection of the mythology, but they have something far more precious. They are real. They are built on the solid foundation of two people who have chosen to see each other clearly, to accept each other fully, and to create something beautiful together, not in spite of their humanity, but because of it. When we finally escape the gilded cage, we discover that real love was waiting for us all along, not in the realm of fantasy, but in the ordinary miracle of two imperfect souls choosing to journey together through an imperfect world. This love may not match the mythology, but it offers something the mythology never could. The deep satisfaction of being truly known and genuinely loved for exactly who we are. In the secret laboratories of medieval alchemists, there stood a furnace that promised the impossible, the transformation of base metal into gold. But the wise among them knew that this furnace was not merely a physical apparatus. It was a metaphor for the human soul's capacity for transmutation. The real gold they sought was not mineral but spiritual, not external but internal. And the Aituzam true furnace was not made of stone and fire, but of the sacred container that forms when two souls dare to meet each other in absolute authenticity. Love, in its most profound sense, is this alchemical furnace. It is the vessel within which the false self must die so that the true self can be born. It is the sacred fire that burns away everything that is not essential, everything that is protective rather than authentic, everything that keeps us safe, but small. Most of us, when we first glimpse this furnace, when we first feel its heat, turn and run. We prefer the familiar comfort of our defended hearts to the terrifying promise of transformation. The alchemists called the first stage of this process nigredo, the blackening, the darkening, the descent into the shadow realm where everything we thought we knew about ourselves must be dissolved. In relationship, this is the moment when our carefully constructed personas begin to crack, when our protective strategies stop working, when the other person's presence forces us to confront aspects of ourselves we have spent years avoiding. This is not the pretty stage of love that makes it into movies or songs. This is the stage where your partner's innocent question triggers a rage that surprises you with its intensity, where their need for space activates an abandonment terror you thought you had overcome, where their criticism pierces through your defenses and finds the wound you have been carrying since childhood. This is the stage where love stops feeling like a blessing and starts feeling like a threat to everything you have built your identity upon. Most relationships end here, in the nigredo. When the heat becomes too intense, when the dissolution becomes too threatening, when the false self begins to scream in protest at its impending death, we conclude that this must be the wrong person, the wrong love, the wrong time. We tell ourselves stories about incompatibility, about toxic dynamics, about why this particular connection was a mistake. But what we are really fleeing from is not the other person. We are fleeing from our own transformation. The nigredo is not comfortable. It cannot be. It is the necessary darkness that precedes every authentic rebirth. In this stage, everything solid seems to liquefy. Your sense of who you are begins to feel unstable. The strategies that have protected you for years suddenly seem inadequate. The persona you have worn like armor begins to feel like a straitjacket. You find yourself saying things you have never said, feeling things you have never felt, behaving in ways that surprise and sometimes horrify you. This is the stage where the wounded child within you finally finds its voice, where the shadow aspects you have kept hidden demand acknowledgement, where the parts of yourself you have disowned begin to clamor for integration. Your partner becomes a mirror reflecting back not just your light, but your darkness, not just your strength, but your vulnerability, not just your love, but your fear, your rage, your need, your shame. In the alchemical tradition, this dissolution is not punishment, it is preparation. The base metal must be broken down before it can be reformed. The seed must die before the plant can grow. The caterpillar must dissolve into primordial soup before the butterfly can emerge. The false self must be composted before the true self can take root. But the nigredo tests our faith in the process. When you are in the middle of this dissolution, when your relationship feels like it is destroying rather than creating you, when every conversation seems to lead to conflict, when your partner's love feels more like surgery than blessing, it requires tremendous courage to stay in the furnace. It requires the faith of the alchemist who continues to tend the fire, even when all they can see is smoke and dissolution. This is where most of us fail the test. We mistake the necessary darkness for evidence that something is wrong. We interpret the dissolution of our false self as the destruction of our real self. We flee from the very process that could liberate us into our fullest authenticity. We choose the familiar prison of our defended heart over the unknown freedom that awaits on the other side of transformation. But for those who have the courage to remain in the furnace, who can trust the process even when they cannot see its purpose, something miraculous begins to occur. The dissolved elements of the false self begin to reorganize themselves into new configurations. What seemed like destruction reveals itself as reconstruction. What felt like death becomes recognizable as birth. This is the albedo, the whitening, the purification, the emergence of something cleaner and clearer than what existed before. In relationship, this is the moment when you begin to see that your partner's triggering of your wounds was not cruelty but compassion, not attack, but invitation. Their love was strong enough to refuse to collude with your false self. Courageous, enough to call forth your authenticity even when it was buried beneath layers of protection. You begin to understand that the conflict you experienced was not evidence of incompatibility, but the friction necessary for growth. Two stones thrown together in a tumbler will chip and scratch each other, but this abrasion is what polishes them both to brilliance. The rough edges that cause such pain were not flaws to be avoided, but the very surfaces that needed to be worn smooth. In the albedo, you start to recognize your partner not as the enemy of your peace, but as the agent of your evolution. They loved you enough to see through your persona to the real person hiding beneath. They cared enough to refuse your performances and demand your presence. They were brave enough to meet your shadow with curiosity rather than judgment, to hold space for your darkness while calling forth your light. But the process is not complete. The alchemist knew that whiteness, though pure, is not yet gold. There is a final stage, the rubedo, the reddening, the marriage of opposites that creates something entirely new. In relationship, this is the integration that occurs when two people have been through the furnace together and emerged not as the same people who entered, but as evolved versions of themselves. This is the stage where your wounds become your wisdom, where your triggers become your teachers, where your vulnerability becomes your strength. You realize that your partner did not change you. They simply loved you enough to create the conditions within which you could change yourself. They became the sacred witness to your transformation, the midwife to your rebirth. The rubedo relationship bears little resemblance to the original connection. It is built not on projection or need, but on recognition and choice. Not on the fantasy of completion, but on the reality of mutual evolution. Not on the promise of perfection, but on the commitment to growth. It is a relationship between two people who have died and been reborn in the furnace of love, who know each other not just in light, but in darkness, not just in strength, but in vulnerability. This is why authentic love is so rare. Most of us are not willing to die for it. We want the gold without the furnace, the transformation without the dissolution, the butterfly without the chrysalis. We want to be loved as we are, without recognizing that who we are is often a carefully constructed defense against love itself. The alchemical furnace asks everything of us. It demands that we release our grip on who we think we are supposed to be and allow ourselves to become who we actually are. It requires that we stop performing love and start receiving it, stop controlling the process and start trusting it, stop protecting ourselves from transformation and start surrendering to it. But for those brave enough to enter this sacred fire, for those willing to be dissolved and reformed in the crucible of authentic relationship, something extraordinary awaits. Not just love, but the capacity for love. Not just connection, but the ability to connect. Not just partnership, but the wisdom to partner with life itself from a place of integrated wholeness. The furnace promises no comfort, but it offers something far more precious, the chance to discover who you really are beneath all the layers of protection and performance. The opportunity to love and be loved not for who you pretend to be, but for who you courageously become when the false self finally dies and the true self is finally free to live. This is the gold the alchemists truly sought, not the metal that adorns the body, but the authenticity that liberates the soul. And it can only be forged in the sacred fire of love that refuses to accept anything less than the truth of who we are. In the ancient wisdom of the tarot, there stands a figure who has turned away from the world's bright distractions to walk, alone into the darkness, carrying only a single lantern to light the way. This is the hermit, not a recluse fleeing from life, but a seeker brave enough to journey inward, to explore the vast wilderness of the soul that exists within every human heart. The hermit understands what our culture has forgotten, that before we can truly meet another, we must first learn to meet ourselves. This is perhaps the most counter-cultural truth of our time, that solitude is not the enemy of love, but its foundation. That being alone is not a punishment to be avoided, but a sacred initiation to be embraced. That the journey inward is not a detour from relationship, but the very path that leads to authentic connection. Yet we live in a world that teaches us to fear our own company, to fill every moment of silence with noise, every space of emptiness with activity, every possibility of solitude with the desperate search for someone, anyone, to save us from the terror of our own presence. Watch how we flee from ourselves. We stay in relationships that have long since died, rather than face the prospect of being alone. We rush from one connection to another, never pausing long enough to digest the lessons of the last. We fill our days with endless distractions, our nights with mindless entertainment, our hearts with the constant chatter of others' voices, so we never have to hear the whisper of our own deepest knowing. This flight from solitude is not merely inconvenient, it is spiritually catastrophic. For how can we know what we truly need in a partner if we have never learned what we need from ourselves? How can we recognize authentic love if we have never experienced authentic self-acceptance? How can we offer our hearts to another when we have never taken the time to discover what our hearts actually contain? The hermit's journey begins with the recognition that most of what we call love is actually a sophisticated form of self-avoidance. We use relationships as elaborate defense mechanisms against the anxiety of our own existence. We make others responsible for our happiness, so we never have to learn to create it ourselves. We seek completion in another, so we never have to do the difficult work of becoming whole within ourselves. But there comes a moment in every soul's evolution when this external search for salvation reveals itself as the beautiful lie it has always been. Perhaps it arrives through heartbreak, when the person you counted on to make you whole leaves you shattered and alone. Perhaps it comes through the slow recognition that even in your most passionate relationships, you have never felt fully known or deeply satisfied. Perhaps it emerges through the simple maturity that realizes you cannot keep asking others to carry what only you can hold. This is the call to the hermit's path, the invitation to turn away from the endless seeking outside yourself and begin the archetypal journey within. It is not a journey that our culture celebrates or supports. There are no guidebooks for this particular expedition, no GPS to navigate the terrain of your own depths, no external validation for the choice to explore your own soul rather than seeking your salvation in another's arms. The hermit's lantern is small. It illuminates only a few steps ahead at a time. This is its wisdom. The journey inward cannot be rushed or mapped in advance. It requires the patience to move slowly through the landscapes of your own being, discovering what has been hidden in the shadows of your own unconscious. It demands the courage to face what you find there, not just the light you have cultivated, but the darkness you have avoided, not just the strength you have developed, but the wounds you have never healed. In the beginning, this solitude feels like punishment. You're accustomed to defining yourself through your relationships, measuring your worth through others' approval, feeling real only when reflected in someone else's eyes. Without these external mirrors, you may feel like you are disappearing, dissolving, becoming nothing. This is terrifying for the ego, which has built its entire identity on its connections to others. But this dissolution is not destruction, it is revelation. As the false constructions of the ego begin to fall away, what remains is not nothing, but everything. Not emptiness, but fullness. Not isolation, but the profound recognition that you have never actually been alone. You begin to discover that solitude and loneliness are not synonymous, that it is possible to be deeply connected to yourself even in the absence of others, and conversely, to be profoundly lonely even in the midst of constant company. The hermit learns to become intimate with their own rhythms, their own needs, their own cycles of expansion and contraction. They discover what brings them joy that has nothing to do with others' approval, what gives them peace that requires no external validation, what feeds their soul in ways that no relationship ever could. They begin to distinguish between the voice of their authentic self and the chorus of internalized others who have been running their lives from the unconscious. This is not selfish work. It is the most selfless gift you can give to any future relationship. For when you know yourself deeply, you no longer need others to complete you, to heal you, to make you feel real. You can offer your wholeness rather than your wounds, your presence rather than your need, your love rather than your hunger. You become capable of choosing relationships from abundance rather than desperation, from clarity rather than confusion, from freedom rather than fear. The hermit's journey reveals that most of what we have called love has actually been a form of mutual dependency, a trading of insecurities, a conspiracy to avoid the responsibility of our own growth. We have used relationships as prisons that keep us safe from the vast freedom of our own potential. We have preferred the familiar limitations of codependency to the unknown possibilities of authentic independence. But independence is not the hermit's final destination. It is the necessary foundation for true interdependence. Only when you are complete within yourself can you meet another complete being and create something together that enhances rather than compensates for your individual wholeness. Only when you have learned to love your own company can you truly choose someone else's company rather than desperately needing it. The hermit discovers that the deepest intimacy is not sexual or romantic, but the intimacy with your own soul. It is the capacity to sit with your own emotions without trying to escape them, to face your own shadows without projecting them onto others, to embrace your own complexity without needing someone else to make sense of you. This intimacy with yourself becomes the template for all future intimacies. As the hermit's journey deepens, a profound paradox emerges. The more comfortable you become with solitude, the more available you become for genuine connection. The more you learn to meet your own needs, the more you can appreciate rather than depend on others' gifts. The more you develop your own inner resources, the more you have to offer from the overflow of your abundance rather than the emptiness of your need. This is why the hermit's lantern burns so brightly. It is fueled not by dependence on external sources, but by the inexhaustible flame of self-knowledge and self-acceptance. It illuminates not just the path forward, but the entire landscape of possibility that opens when you are no longer afraid of your own company. The culture will tell you that this journey is selfish, that turning inward is turning away from love. But the hermit knows better. They understand that the greatest gift you can give to any relationship is your own psychological and spiritual maturity. They know that authentic love can only flow between two people who have first learned to love themselves, who have done the inner work necessary to show up as whole beings rather than half-persons seeking completion. The hermit's path is not about rejecting relationship. It is about preparing for relationship that is worthy of two complete souls. It is about developing the capacity to love from fullness rather than emptiness, to connect from strength rather than weakness, to commit from choice rather than desperation. It is about becoming the kind of person you would want to be in relationship with. When the hermit finally emerges from their inner journey, they carry something precious, the knowledge that they are complete, that they are enough, that they can create meaning and joy and love within themselves. This is not arrogance. It is the deep humility that comes from recognizing your own wholeness and therefore your capacity to honor the wholeness in another. The hermit returns to the world of relationship not as a half-person seeking their other half, but as a complete being ready to explore what two whole people can create together. They bring their lantern, the light of self-knowledge, into every connection, illuminating not just their own path, but creating space for another to walk their own path with equal dignity and autonomy. This is love's deepest secret. It can only truly exist between two people who have first learned to exist completely within themselves. The hermit's journey is not a detour from love. It is love's most essential preparation, the inner work that makes authentic relationship not just possible, but inevitable. There exists within you a sacred temple where two ancient figures have stood in eternal conversation since the moment consciousness first stirred in the darkness of your being. One carries the sword of discrimination, the other the chalice of receptivity. One builds walls, the other opens doors. One speaks in logic and linear thought, the other in intuition and circular wisdom. These are not merely concepts borrowed from the collective understanding of masculine and feminine. They are living archetypes, breathing forces that move through the corridors of your psyche like complementary winds, shaping the landscape of who you are becoming. Yet how few of us have learned to recognize these inner companions, let alone invite them into conscious dialogue. Instead, we walk through the world as half-beings, carrying only one torch in the darkness, wondering why our light seems so dim, why our path feels so uncertain. We have been taught to identify with one aspect of our nature, while exiling the other to the shadowlands of the unconscious, creating an inner civil war that manifests in our outer relationships as endless seeking, endless disappointment, endless projection of our missing pieces onto the faces of those we claim to love. The masculine principle within you, regardless of your biological sex, is the force that separates, defines, and creates structure. It is the energy that says, "I am," and draws boundaries around that declaration. It builds the ego's fortress, establishes goals, creates hierarchies of meaning. It is the part of you that cuts through confusion with the blade of understanding, that transforms the chaos of possibility into the order of decision. This inner masculine carries the fire of consciousness itself, the light that illuminates and the sword that discriminates between this and that, between self and other, between truth and illusion. But listen carefully to how this force has been wounded in our time. The masculine principle has been reduced to caricature, to aggression without wisdom, to power without responsibility, to action without reflection. We have confused authentic masculine energy with domination, with the desperate need to control rather than to lead, to conquer rather than to protect. This wounded masculine appears in men who mistake violence for strength, in women who adopt a harsh, competitive edge as their only path to success, in all of us when we attempt to solve every problem through force rather than understanding. The feminine principle within you is the force that receives, nurtures, and transforms. It is the energy that says, "I am connected," and recognizes the web of relationship that holds all things. It creates the space for growth, the container for emergence, the fertile darkness in which new life can gestate. It is the part of you that knows without needing to prove, that loves without conditions, that trusts the natural rhythms of expansion and contraction, of death and rebirth. There exists within the human heart a wound so ancient, so fundamental to our very existence, that we spend entire lifetimes trying to heal it through means that were never designed to bear such weight. It is the wound of separation, not the separation from another person, though that pain is real and sharp, but the far more profound separation from our own essential nature, the splitting of the ego from the self, the conscious mind from the soul's deeper wisdom. This sacred wound was carved into our psyche the moment we first became aware of ourselves as separate beings, distinct from the oceanic unity of early consciousness. It is the price we pay for individuation, for becoming human rather than remaining in the undifferentiated bliss of unconscious wholeness. Jung understood this wound intimately, recognizing it as both our greatest suffering and our most profound opportunity for growth. The wound manifests first as an ache of incompleteness, a sense that something essential is missing from our experience of being alive. We feel it most acutely in moments of solitude, when the distractions of daily life fall away and we are left alone with the echo of our own heartbeat in the vast cathedral of consciousness. It is then that we become aware of the hollow at the center of our being, the place where wholeness should reside, but where instead we find only longing. This existential loneliness is unlike any other form of isolation. It is not cured by company, not healed by conversation or comfort. It is the loneliness of the soul separated from its source, the ego cut off from the deeper currents of psychic life that once nourished it without conscious effort. We are like streams that have been diverted from their natural course, still flowing, but no longer connected to the vast reservoir from which we originally sprang. In our desperation to heal this wound, we turn to romantic love with expectations that no human relationship was ever meant to fulfill. We unconsciously seek in another person what we have lost within ourselves, that sense of completion, of unity, of coming home to our essential nature. We project onto our beloved the image of the missing piece of our psyche, the anima or animus that Jung recognized as the archetypal bridge between conscious and unconscious, ego and self. But romantic love, however profound and transformative it may be, cannot heal the wound of existential separation. When we attempt to use another person as a substitute for our own lost wholeness, we place an impossible burden upon the relationship. We ask our partner to be not just themselves but also our missing self, to fill the void that can only be filled through inner work, through the patient reconstruction of the bridge between ego and soul. This misunderstanding of love's true nature leads to the inevitable cycle of projection, disillusionment, and disappointment that characterizes so many intimate relationships. In the initial stages of romantic love, the projection works its magic, and we do indeed feel whole, complete, unified. The beloved becomes the vessel for all our unrealized potential, all our unlived possibilities, all the aspects of ourselves that we have never learned to embody consciously. During this phase, we experience what feels like a healing of the sacred wound. The ache of separation subsides, replaced by the intoxicating sense of having found our other half, our missing piece, the one who makes us complete. We mistake this temporary healing for permanent transformation, not recognizing that what we have achieved is not integration, but unconscious merger, not wholeness, but dependency. The persona we construct around romantic love often becomes our most elaborate and convincing mask. We learn to be the perfect partner, the ideal lover, the one who deserves to be completed by another. This romantic persona can be so compelling, so seemingly authentic, that we ourselves believe in its reality. But beneath its polished surface, the sacred wound continues to fester, unhealed and unaddressed. As time passes and the initial projection begins to fade, as it inevitably must when confronted with the reality of another person's full humanity, the wound reasserts itself with renewed intensity. The beloved, who once seemed to hold the key to our wholeness, reveals themselves to be simply human, flawed and limited like ourselves. The magical healing they seem to provide proves to be temporary, leaving us more aware than ever of our fundamental incompleteness. This is the moment of profound disillusionment that destroys so many relationships. Unable to understand that the failure lies not in the relationship itself, but in our expectations of what another person can provide. We often respond with blame, resentment, or desperate attempts to recreate the initial projection. We may seek the fault in our partner's inability to love us properly, or in our own inadequacy as objects of love, never recognizing that the wound we are trying to heal exists at a level far deeper than romantic relationship can reach. The sacred wound is not meant to be healed by another person. It is meant to be transformed through the slow, patient work of reconnecting the ego with the self, the conscious mind with the deeper wisdom of the psyche. This reconnection cannot be achieved through merger with another, but only through the courageous journey inward, through the willingness to meet and integrate the disowned aspects of our own nature. Jung's concept of individuation offers the true path to healing the sacred wound. Through the process of making conscious what has been unconscious, of withdrawing our projections and owning our shadow, of learning to dialogue with the deeper archetypal forces within our psyche, we gradually rebuild the bridge between ego and self that was broken in our original fall into separate consciousness. This inner work requires us to develop a relationship with our own unconscious that parallels the intimacy we seek in romantic love. We must learn to court our own soul with the same dedication we bring to courting a beloved. We must develop the capacity for solitude that allows us to hear the subtle voices of the unconscious, to receive the images and symbols through which the self communicates with the ego. The wound becomes sacred when we recognize it not as a flaw to be fixed, but as an opening through which transformation can occur. Like the wounded healer of mythology, we discover that our deepest suffering contains the seeds of our greatest wisdom. The very incompleteness that drives us to seek healing in others becomes the motivation for the inner journey that leads to genuine wholeness. As we begin to heal the sacred wound through inner work rather than outer relationship, our capacity for authentic love paradoxically increases. No longer burdened with the impossible task of completing us, our partners become free to be themselves. No longer projecting our unlived life onto another, we become capable of seeing and loving the actual person before us rather than the fantasy figure we have created. The healed sacred wound does not mean the end of longing or the elimination of our need for connection with others. Rather, it transforms the quality of that longing from desperate neediness to genuine appreciation, from unconscious merger to conscious relating. We learn to love from wholeness rather than from emptiness, to offer ourselves as complete beings, rather than as fractured souls seeking completion. This transformation of our capacity for love represents one of the most profound gifts of the individuation process. When we stop asking another person to heal our sacred wound, we create space for a different kind of love to emerge, love that celebrates rather than completes, that enhances rather than fulfills, that connects two whole beings rather than attempting to create one whole being from two incomplete parts. The sacred wound, once recognized and properly addressed, becomes the doorway to authentic intimacy. Through our willingness to face our own incompleteness and work toward genuine wholeness, we develop the capacity for the kind of love that Jung recognized as truly mature. Love that serves not our own need for completion, but the growth and flourishing of consciousness itself, both within ourselves and in those we are privileged to love. In the ancient myths, the serpent was never merely a creature of evil, but a bearer of wisdom, coiled in the depths of the earth where the roots of the world tree drink from the waters of knowing. It is the serpent that whispers the uncomfortable truths, that reveals what we have hidden from ourselves, that transforms poison into medicine through the alchemy of consciousness. Your unconscious speaks with this same serpent voice, not to harm you, but to awaken you to the deeper currents of your being that flow beneath the surface of your carefully constructed life. Listen closely to the language your psyche speaks, for it is far more eloquent than the words that fall from your conscious mind. It speaks through the sudden flutter of your heart when a certain type of person enters the room. It speaks through the inexplicable irritation that rises when your partner uses that particular tone of voice. It speaks through the patterns that repeat in your relationships like a song played on an endless loop, each verse familiar yet somehow strange, as if you are hearing your own story told in a foreign tongue. These are not random occurrences, not mere quirks of chemistry or coincidence. They are symptoms, sacred symptoms, through which your unconscious attempts to guide you toward the very experiences you need for your psychological and spiritual evolution. What you call romantic struggle, what you name as relationship failure, what you experience as the endless cycle of attraction and disappointment, these are not obstacles blocking your path to love, but stepping stones leading you deeper into the mystery of who you are becoming. The serpent's wisdom begins with recognizing that your romantic history is not a series of accidents, but a carefully orchestrated curriculum designed by the deepest intelligence within you. Every person you have loved, every heart you have broken, every time your own heart has shattered against the rocks of reality, each experience carries within it a specific teaching, a particular medicine that your soul has prescribed for its own healing and growth. Consider the patterns that weave through your romantic life like threads in a tapestry you are only now learning to see. Perhaps you are drawn again and again to partners who seem strong and decisive in the beginning, but gradually reveal themselves to be controlling and possessive. This is not bad luck or poor judgment. This is your unconscious attempting to show you something about your relationship with your own power, your own capacity for healthy authority, your own need to reclaim the inner masculine that you have projected onto others. Or perhaps you find yourself repeatedly attracted to people who seem mysterious and emotionally unavailable, whose love feels like water you can never quite cup in your hands. This too is not a character flaw, but a symptom pointing toward your need to develop a deeper relationship with the feminine principle within yourself. The capacity for emotional intimacy, for vulnerability, for the kind of presence that doesn't need to chase or possess, but can simply be with what is. The unconscious is remarkably precise in its choice of romantic partners for your growth. It will draw you to exactly the people who can trigger your deepest wounds, activate your most primitive defenses, and invite you into the very territories of your psyche that you have spent a lifetime avoiding. This is not cruelty, but compassion of the highest order, the kind of fierce love that is willing to break your heart open so that something truer can emerge from the wreckage. Your attractions are not arbitrary. They are archetypal. When you feel that sudden, inexplicable magnetism towards someone, when your rational mind cannot explain why this particular person affects you so profoundly, you are encountering not just another individual, but a carrier of archetypal energy that resonates with unlived aspects of your own psyche. They become a walking invitation to explore the territories within yourself that remain unmapped, unexplored, unconscious. The person who triggers your deepest insecurities is often carrying the energy of your own inner critic, the harsh internal voice that you have never learned to dialogue with consciously. The person who makes you feel most alive and expansive is often reflecting back to you your own unlived potential, the aspects of yourself that you have not yet dared to embody. The person who infuriates you beyond all reason is often mirroring back to you the shadow aspects of your own personality that you refuse to acknowledge. This is why the ancient wisdom traditions spoke of romantic love as a form of spiritual practice, a path of awakening disguised as personal fulfillment. Every relationship becomes a mirror in which you can see not only who you are, but who you are capable of becoming. Every conflict becomes an opportunity to recognize the internal battles you have been fighting in the theater of your own mind. Every moment of tenderness becomes a glimpse of the love you are learning to offer to the disowned aspects of yourself. But reading the symptoms requires developing what Jung called symbolic consciousness, the ability to see through the literal events of your life to the deeper patterns and meanings they contain. This is not easy work, for it requires you to suspend your ordinary way of understanding causation and enter into a more poetic relationship with your experience. When your partner's habits suddenly become unbearably irritating, the symptom is not asking you to change them, but to explore what aspect of yourself you are seeing reflected in their behavior. When you find yourself consumed with jealousy over their attention to someone else, the symptom is not pointing to their infidelity, but to your own relationship with your sense of worth, your own capacity to generate the love and validation you seek from outside sources. The serpent's wisdom teaches you to ask different questions. Instead of, "Why does this keep happening to me?" you learn to ask, "What is this experience trying to teach me?" Instead of, "How can I fix this relationship?" you learn to ask, "How is this relationship inviting me to grow?" Instead of, "Why am I attracted to the wrong people?" you learn to ask, "What aspects of myself am I meeting through these attractions?" This shift in questioning transforms your entire relationship to romantic suffering. What once felt like meaningless pain begins to reveal itself as meaningful initiation. What once seemed like evidence of your failure in love begins to show itself as evidence of your psyche's intelligence in creating exactly the experiences you need for your continued evolution. The symptoms speak most clearly through repetition. The patterns that cycle through your relationships are like recurring dreams. They will continue to appear until you understand their message and integrate their teaching. If you consistently find yourself in relationships where you feel unseen and unheard, your unconscious is creating opportunities for you to examine your own relationship with visibility, with voice, with the courage to show up authentically in the world. If you repeatedly attract partners who are emotionally unavailable, your psyche is inviting you to explore your own capacity for emotional availability, not just to others, but to yourself. If you find yourself caught in cycles of pursuit and rejection, the symptom is pointing you toward an examination of your own relationship with desire, with wanting, with the ways you may be seeking external validation for an internal lack of self-love. The most difficult symptoms to decode are those wrapped in the language of romantic obsession. When you find yourself unable to let go of someone who clearly cannot meet you in love, when your thoughts circle endlessly around someone who has already shown you their limitations, when you feel possessed by a longing that seems to have nothing to do with the actual person and everything to do with some unnamed hunger within yourself. These are moments when the serpent's wisdom is speaking most urgently. Romantic obsession is often the psyche's way of creating such intensity that you cannot ignore its message. The person you cannot forget is often carrying the energy of an unlived aspect of yourself that demands integration. The relationship you cannot release is often holding the key to a part of your psyche that has been locked away since childhood. The love you cannot have is often pointing you toward the love you have never learned to give yourself. But the serpent's wisdom is not only revealed through pain and struggle. It also speaks through moments of unexpected grace, through the sudden sense of recognition when you meet someone who feels like home, through the ease that sometimes arises between two people who have done enough inner work to meet each other, with genuine presence rather than projection. These moments of authentic connection are also symptoms of your growing capacity for real intimacy, for love that is based on seeing and being seen, rather than needing and being needed. They point toward the possibilities that emerge when two people have learned to relate to each other as sovereign beings, rather than as complementary fragments seeking completion. The deepest wisdom of the serpent teaches you that every symptom in your romantic life is also an invitation to a deeper relationship with your own soul. Your patterns with others reveal your patterns with yourself. Your capacity for love in relationship reflects your capacity for self-love. Your ability to see others clearly is directly proportional to your willingness to see yourself with the same clarity and compassion. As you learn to read the symptoms with symbolic consciousness, you begin to develop what might be called relationship as spiritual practice. Every interaction becomes an opportunity for consciousness. Every trigger becomes a doorway into greater self-awareness. Every moment of love becomes a celebration of your growing capacity to see the divine reflected in human form. This transformation in perception changes everything. You stop being a victim of your romantic history and become a student of your own unconscious wisdom. You stop seeking the perfect partner and start becoming the kind of person who can recognize and appreciate authentic love when it appears. You stop trying to control the outcomes of your relationships and start trusting the intelligence that is orchestrating your experiences for your highest growth and healing. The serpent that once seemed to threaten your happiness reveals itself as the guardian of your deepest wisdom. The patterns that once felt like prison walls become the very structure through which your consciousness can expand. The symptoms that once drove you to despair become the sacred text through which you learn to read the language of your own soul's evolution. This is the gift of developing a conscious relationship with your romantic symptoms, not to eliminate them, for they are too valuable as teachers, but to decode their wisdom and integrate their offerings. In doing so, you transform the entire foundation of how you approach love, moving from unconscious repetition to conscious choice, from projection to authentic seeing, from the desperate seeking of completion to the celebration of connection, between two whole beings who have learned to dance with their own depths. In the sacred chamber of your psyche, there comes a moment when everything you believed about love must be laid upon the altar and consumed by flames. This is not destruction for its own sake, but the necessary burning that precedes rebirth, the phoenix fire that transforms the lead of unconscious, relating into the gold of authentic intimacy. You have carried illusions about love, like precious heirlooms, passed down through generations of misunderstanding, polished bright by countless romantic fantasies, cherished as if they were the very keys to happiness itself. But the time comes when these beautiful lies must die, so that something infinitely more beautiful can be born from their ashes. The illusions burn slowly at first. Perhaps it begins with the gradual recognition that the fairy tale of finding your other half has left you feeling perpetually incomplete, searching endlessly for someone to fill the void that can only be filled from within. Perhaps it starts with the dawning awareness that the love you thought you wanted, that merger, that dissolution of boundaries, that romantic fusion, would actually annihilate the very individuality that makes genuine love possible in the first place. Or perhaps the fire ignites when you finally understand that every time you fell in love with someone's potential rather than their reality, you were engaged in a sophisticated form of self-deception, projecting your own unlived possibilities onto another and then falling in love with your own reflection. These moments of recognition burn like acid in the heart, dissolving the comfortable narratives that have structured your understanding of what it means to love and be loved. But this burning, this dissolution of romantic mythology, is not the bitter end of your capacity for love. It is the beginning of your capacity for something far more profound. What dies in the phoenix fire is not love itself, but your immature relationship to love, your unconscious expectations of what love should provide, your childish belief that love exists to make you feel better about yourself rather than to call you into greater wholeness. The path of individuation, that lifelong journey towards psychological wholeness that Jung recognized as the deepest purpose of human existence, requires this death of illusions. For how can you relate authentically to another when you have never learned to relate authentically to yourself? How can you love someone for who they truly are when you have never developed the courage to see who you truly are? How can you create genuine intimacy when you are still hiding from your own depths behind the masks of persona and projection? Individuation is not a luxury for those with time for self-reflection. It is the essential foundation for any relationship that aspires to be more than mutual dependency disguised as love. It is the slow, painstaking work of becoming a whole human being rather than a collection of fragments seeking completion through another. It is the courage to face your shadow, to reclaim your projections, to integrate the unlived aspects of your personality, and to develop a conscious relationship with the unconscious forces that move through your life like underground rivers. This work begins in solitude, in the dark night of the soul, where you must confront everything you have been avoiding about yourself. You must meet the critic that lives in your mind, speaking in the voices of parents and teachers and lovers who found you lacking. You must acknowledge the rebel who has sabotaged your happiness whenever success seemed too threatening, too exposing, too likely to attract the kind of attention you simultaneously crave and fear. You must recognize the victim who has specialized in attracting relationships that confirm your deepest fears about your unworthiness of love. These are not pleasant encounters. The shadow does not reveal itself in moments of spiritual bliss, but in the raw, uncomfortable confrontations with aspects of yourself that you would prefer to deny or project onto others. The inner critic emerges not as a gentle voice of guidance, but as the harsh judge that has been running commentary on your every move since childhood. The victim consciousness appears not as obvious self-pity, but as the subtle ways you have arranged your life to confirm your powerlessness rather than claim your agency. Yet each of these shadow encounters is also an opportunity for reclamation, for integrating disowned energy back into conscious awareness, where it can serve your growth rather than sabotage your happiness. The critic, when befriended rather than battled, becomes the voice of discernment that can help you make better choices. The rebel, when understood rather than suppressed, becomes the force of authentic self-expression that refuses to conform to expectations that violate your deeper truth. The victim, when transformed rather than indulged, becomes the compassionate witness to suffering that can hold space for both your own pain and the pain of others without being overwhelmed by either. This integration of shadow material is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process that continues throughout your entire life. Each new level of consciousness reveals previously hidden aspects of your personality that require attention and integration. Each new relationship, each new challenge, each new phase of life activates different configurations of your psyche, bringing new shadow material to the surface for examination and assimilation. But as this work deepens, something remarkable begins to happen. You start to develop what Jung called psychological ego strength, not the rigid ego that defends against all threat to its carefully constructed identity, but the flexible, resilient ego that can hold complexity, embrace paradox, and maintain its center even when confronted with experiences that challenge its understanding of reality. This psychological maturity creates the foundation for authentic intimacy because it allows you to show up in relationship as a whole person rather than as a collection of needs seeking fulfillment. You no longer require your partner to complete you because you have taken responsibility for your own completeness. You no longer need them to validate your worth because you have learned to source your sense of value from your relationship with your own depths rather than from external approval. The capacity for genuine intimacy emerges from this foundation of self-knowledge and self-acceptance. When you have faced your own darkness, you lose the need to project it onto others or to require them to carry your disowned light. When you have learned to hold compassion for your own struggles, you develop the capacity to hold space for your partner's struggles without trying to fix them or taking responsibility for their emotional state. This is the paradox of individuation in relationship. The more whole you become as an individual, the more capable you become of genuine connection with another. The more clearly you see yourself, the more clearly you can see your partner. The more you have learned to love the complexity of your own nature, the more you can appreciate the complexity of theirs. But this path requires you to relinquish one of the most cherished illusions about romantic love, the belief that love should make life easier, that the right relationship will solve your problems, rather than introduce you to new levels of challenge and growth. Authentic intimacy is not a refuge from the difficulties of human existence, but a laboratory for exploring them more deeply, more consciously, with the support and witness of another who is committed to their own growth as well as yours. The Phoenix path reveals that every relationship becomes a mirror for your level of consciousness, reflecting back to you exactly where you are in your own journey of individuation. If you are still operating from victim consciousness, you will attract partners who either rescue you or victimize you, confirming your fundamental beliefs about your powerlessness. If you are still identified with your persona, you will attract partners who love your mask rather than your authentic self, creating relationships based on performance rather than genuine intimacy. But as individuation progresses, as you develop a more conscious relationship with your own depths, you begin to attract and be attracted to partners who are engaged in their own journey of self-discovery. The relationship becomes less about finding someone to complete you and more about finding someone with whom you can explore the mystery of human connection between two sovereign beings. This shift transforms every aspect of how you approach relationship. Conflict becomes an opportunity for greater understanding rather than evidence of incompatibility. Differences become sources of learning and expansion rather than threats to harmony. The inevitable challenges that arise between two complex human beings become invitations to deeper intimacy rather than reasons to question whether you belong together. The work of individuation also reveals the profound difference between romantic love and what Jung called conscious love. Romantic love is based on projection, fantasy, and the temporary suspension of critical judgment that allows you to see your beloved as the answer to all your longings. It is the love that depends on the other person remaining consistent with your image of them, that crumbles when they reveal aspects of themselves that don't fit your romantic narrative. Conscious love, by contrast, is based on seeing, really, seeing another person in their full complexity and choosing to love them not despite their humanity, but because of it. It is the love that grows stronger as you see more of who they really are, that deepens as they show you their struggles as well as their strengths, that becomes more rather than less intimate as the initial romantic projection gives way to genuine knowledge of their character. This conscious love requires immense courage because it asks you to love someone as they are rather than as you wish they could be. It requires you to give up the fantasy of the perfect partner and learn to appreciate the beauty of an imperfect human being who is engaged in their own struggle to become whole. It requires you to release your attachment to how the relationship should look and learn to appreciate how it actually unfolds with all its unexpected challenges and surprising gifts. The Phoenix path ultimately leads to the recognition that your capacity for love is not dependent on finding the right person, but on becoming the right person. Not perfect, but authentic. Not complete, but whole. Not without wounds, but conscious of how those wounds can become sources of wisdom and compassion rather than patterns of unconscious repetition. As you walk this path, you discover that individuation and relationship are not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of the same journey toward wholeness. Your relationships become laboratories for your continued growth, and your individual development becomes the gift you bring to your relationships. The more you individuate, the more you have to offer another. The more consciously you relate, the more you learn about yourself. This is the wisdom of the Phoenix, that what appears to be ending is actually beginning, that what seems like death is actually birth, that the flames that consume your illusions about love are the very fires that forge your capacity for authentic intimacy. From the ashes of romantic fantasy rises the possibility of conscious love, mature intimacy, and the kind of relationship that serves not only your personal happiness, but your continued evolution as a human being. The journey is long, the path is difficult, and the work never truly ends. But with each step along the phoenix path, you move closer to the possibility of love that is based not on need, but on choice, not on projection, but on recognition, not on the desperate seeking of completion, but on the joyful celebration of connection between two whole beings who have learned to dance with their own depths. There comes a moment in the long journey of the soul when two beings who have walked the difficult path of individuation encounter one another not as seekers looking for completion, but as whole beings recognizing the divine spark that burns within another autonomous consciousness. This meeting is what the ancient alchemists called the conjunctio, the sacred marriage that transforms without destroying, that creates unity while preserving the essential separateness that makes love possible rather than merger inevitable. This is not the desperate collision of two wounded souls seeking to heal their sacred wound through fusion with another. This is not the unconscious projection of anima onto woman or animus onto man, where we mistake our inner opposite for the person standing before us. This is something far more rare and infinitely more precious. The meeting of two individuals who have done the hard work of becoming themselves, who can therefore offer the gift of authentic presence rather than the burden of unconscious need. When such souls encounter one another, they create what Jung understood as a genuine conjunctio, an alchemical transformation that occurs not through the dissolution of individual boundaries, but through their conscious transcendence. Like two flames that dance together while maintaining their own essential fire, these beings discover that love at its highest expression is not absorption, but recognition, not completion, but celebration of the mystery of consciousness knowing itself through another consciousness. The traditional understanding of romantic love as the merging of two into one reveals itself, in the light of this deeper possibility, as a beautiful but ultimately unconscious fantasy. The lovers who proclaim themselves to be two halves of the same soul are unconsciously expressing the ego's longing to return to the undifferentiated wholeness of early childhood, to escape the burden of individual consciousness by dissolving back into oceanic unity. But the conjunctio offers something far more profound, the possibility of being simultaneously one and two, unified and separate, merged and distinct. This paradox can only be held by consciousness that has developed what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to contain opposites without being torn apart by their tension. The individuated soul has learned to live comfortably with paradox, to embrace the both and rather than demanding the either-or that satisfies the ego's need for simplicity and control. In the conjunctio, this capacity for holding paradox becomes the foundation for a love that transcends the ordinary categories of human relationship. When two such beings meet, they recognize in each other not the missing piece of themselves, but the miracle of another complete universe of consciousness. There is no desperate need to possess or be possessed, no unconscious compulsion to merge boundaries until individual identity disappears. Instead, there is wonder, the profound amazement that consciousness can take such varied and beautiful forms, that the divine creative principle can express itself through such different yet complementary patterns of being. The attraction between individuated souls operates on a frequency that transcends the biological, the emotional, and even the psychological. It is the attraction of consciousness to consciousness, of soul to soul, of the divine principle recognizing itself in another form. This recognition creates a sacred tension, a creative field of energy that exists in the space between the two, beings without belonging exclusively to either one. In this space between, this sacred temenos that is created when two whole beings choose to dance together while maintaining their essential autonomy, something unprecedented can emerge. It is not a child in the biological sense, though it may include that possibility. It is not a merging of personalities, though deep intimacy may develop. It is the birth of a third thing, a creative principle that belongs neither to one nor the other, but emerges from their conscious choice to create together while remaining fully themselves. The alchemists understood this mystery in their symbolism of the hermaphrodite, the divine being that contained both masculine and feminine principles while transcending both. But they were not describing a literal androgyne. They were pointing toward the transcendent function that emerges when opposites are held in creative tension rather than resolved through synthesis or merger. The conjunctio creates this transcendent function not within one individual psyche, but in the sacred space between two individuated beings. This love that emerges from fullness rather than emptiness has a quality that ordinary romantic love cannot achieve. Because it is not driven by need, it cannot be manipulated through withdrawal or threat of abandonment. Because it is not based on projection, it cannot be destroyed by the inevitable revelation of human limitation and shadow. Because it does not depend on the other for completion, it can celebrate the other's growth and transformation, even when that growth leads in unexpected directions. The individuated lover is simultaneously utterly committed and completely free. This is not the freedom of non-attachment that avoids genuine intimacy, nor is it the commitment that imprisons both partners in fixed roles and expectations. It is the freedom that comes from choosing love consciously rather than falling into it unconsciously, and the commitment that flows from recognition of the sacred rather than from fear of abandonment or loss of security. Such lovers become mirrors for each other's continued individuation rather than obstacles to it. They see clearly both the realized potential and the unlived possibilities in their beloved, and they love both equally. They do not attempt to change their partner or to complete them, but they create conditions in which the other's continued becoming is supported and celebrated. They understand that true love serves not the ego's need for security and completion, but the self's drive toward ever greater consciousness and authentic expression. The sexual union of such beings transcends the biological and becomes a form of active imagination, a conscious participation in the archetypal energies of creation itself. Their bodies become temples in which the divine masculine and feminine principles dance together, creating not just physical pleasure but spiritual transformation. They make love not just to each other, but to the creative principle that flows through them both, offering their union as a conscious sacrifice to the mystery of consciousness, knowing itself through form. This is why the ancient traditions spoke of sexual union as sacred, as a pathway to divine experience rather than merely personal satisfaction. When two individuated souls come together in conscious love, they create a temporary dissolution of the boundaries between self and other, between human and divine, between individual consciousness and the greater cosmic consciousness from which all individuality emerges. But this dissolution is voluntary, temporary, and ultimately in service of greater individuation rather than escape from it. The conjunctio requires enormous psychological maturity from both participants. Each must have developed a solid sense of individual identity that cannot be threatened by intimacy or dissolved through union. Each must have integrated enough of their shadow that they do not project their darkness onto their partner or use the relationship as a way of avoiding their own psychological work. Each must have developed enough relationship with their inner opposite, Anima or Animus, that they do not unconsciously burden their partner with carrying these archetypal energies. Most importantly, each must have learned to love themselves in the deepest sense, not the narcissistic self-love of the ego, but the profound appreciation for their own unique expression of consciousness that comes through successful individuation. Only those who have learned to be alone without loneliness, to be complete without being closed, to be whole without being static, can participate in the kind of love that enhances rather than diminishes individuality. The path to such love is long and often lonely. It requires the courage to choose inner work over outer relationship when the two conflict, to develop one's own consciousness rather than seeking completion through another. It demands the patience to wait for authentic meeting rather than settling for the comfortable unconsciousness of conventional romance. It asks for the wisdom to recognize the difference between the soul's true longing for conscious union and the ego's desperate need for security and validation. But for those who have walked this path, who have paid the price of individuation and learned to inhabit their own wholeness, the possibility of the conjunctio represents the culmination of their inner work. It is not a reward for their efforts, but a natural flowering of consciousness that has learned to know itself fully and can therefore participate consciously in the greater mystery of love as a creative and transformative force in the universe. Chapter 2. Such love appears. It transforms not only the two beings who participate in it, but ripples outward to touch all those who witness it. It becomes a demonstration of what human love can be when it serves not the ego's need for completion, but the soul's drive toward ever greater consciousness and ever more authentic expression of the divine creative principle that moves through all existence. In the depths of authentic relationship, where two souls have learned to dance the sacred dance of intimacy without losing themselves in unconscious merger, there comes a profound recognition that love is not a castle to be built and defended, not a treasure to be won and hoarded, not a destination at which one finally arrives after the long journey of seeking. Love reveals itself as something far more mysterious and demanding, an eternal return, a continuous spiral of choosing consciousness over comfort, growth over security, truth over the beautiful illusions that make relationships seem easier than it actually is. This understanding transforms everything. Where once we might have believed that finding the right person or achieving the perfect relationship would end our struggles with love, we now recognize that authentic love is not the end of struggle, but its transformation into something sacred. The work of love becomes not the desperate effort to eliminate conflict, misunderstanding, and the inevitable friction that occurs when two separate consciousnesses attempt to create something together, but rather the conscious engagement with these challenges as opportunities for deeper knowing, greater compassion, and ever more authentic expression of our essential nature. The eternal return reveals that every day we must choose love anew, not because our love is weak or unstable, but because consciousness itself is a dynamic process that requires constant renewal. Just as we cannot live today on yesterday's breath, we cannot sustain authentic relationship on yesterday's insights, yesterday's intimacy, yesterday's commitment. Each morning brings us back to the fundamental choice. Will we meet our beloved with fresh eyes and an open heart, or will we relate to them through the accumulated filters of memory, expectation, and unconscious projection? This daily choice becomes a spiritual practice of the highest order. To love consciously means to recognize that the person sleeping beside us is not the same person who was there yesterday, for consciousness is always changing, always becoming, always revealing new depths and previously hidden aspects of its infinite complexity. The beloved we think we know completely is an illusion created by the ego's need for security and predictability. The actual person before us is a mystery that deepens rather than diminishes with time, an ever-unfolding revelation of the inexhaustible creativity of consciousness, expressing itself through human form. In conventional relationships, this recognition of constant change often creates anxiety, threat, a desperate attempt to freeze the beloved in familiar patterns that allow us to maintain the illusion of control and predictability. But in conscious relationship, in partnership that serves individuation, rather than ego security, this constant becoming is celebrated as the very essence of what makes love alive and transformative. We learn to love not just who our partner is, but who they are becoming. Not just their realized potential, but their unrealized possibilities. This requires developing what Jung understood as the transcendent function on a relational level, the capacity to hold paradox, to contain opposites, to find creative solutions that honor both individual growth and relational unity. We must learn to be simultaneously deeply committed and completely open to change, utterly devoted and entirely free, intimately connected and respectfully separate. These are not contradictions to be resolved, but paradoxes to be lived. Tensions that generate the creative energy that keeps relationship dynamic and transformative. The eternal return means that we never graduate from the basic work of relationship. There is no advanced level where we no longer need to pay attention to projection, where we never fall back into unconscious patterns, where we automatically respond from wisdom rather than reactivity. Even the most individuated souls, even those who have done decades of inner work, even couples who have achieved genuine conjunctio, must return again and again to the fundamental practices of conscious relating. Withdrawing projections, owning shadow material, choosing response over reaction, speaking truth instead of comfortable lies. This is not failure. This is the nature of consciousness itself. Just as individuation is not a destination but a lifelong process of becoming ever more conscious and authentic, conscious relationship is not an achievement but an ongoing practice of choosing love over fear, openness over defensiveness, growth over stagnation. Each time we recognize that we have slipped back into unconscious patterns, each time we catch ourselves projecting onto our partner or defending against intimacy, each time we choose to return to consciousness rather than remaining in comfortable unconsciousness, we participate in the eternal return that keeps love alive and transformative. The shadow plays a crucial role in this eternal return. No matter how much inner work we have done, no matter how integrated we believe ourselves to be, intimate relationship has a unique capacity to constellate aspects of our shadow that remain hidden in other contexts. Our partner, through their very closeness, their ability to see us in our most unguarded moments, their inevitable failure to meet all our unconscious expectations, becomes a mirror that reflects back to us precisely those aspects of ourselves that we have been unable or unwilling to see clearly. This can be deeply disturbing to the ego, which prefers to maintain its carefully constructed self-image of being a good person, a conscious person, someone who has transcended the petty jealousies, irrational angers, and primitive fears that characterize less evolved human beings. But the eternal return of shadow material within intimate relationship is not a sign of failure in our individuation process. It is its continuation, its deepening, its refinement through the crucible of sustained intimacy. Learning to welcome these shadow revelations rather than defending against them becomes one of the most important skills in conscious relationship. When our partner triggers in us a response that reveals an aspect of our shadow, we have a choice. We can blame them for making us feel or act in ways that contradict our idealized self-image, or we can use this triggering as an opportunity for deeper self-knowledge and greater integration. The eternal return invites us to choose the latter, again and again, transforming what could be sources of conflict into opportunities for growth. Similarly, the Anima and Animus, those archetypal images of our inner opposite, continue to seek projection onto our partner throughout the life of a relationship. The eternal return means recognizing that we never completely withdraw these projections once and for all. Instead, we develop the capacity to recognize when projection is occurring and to consciously reclaim these archetypal energies as aspects of our own psyche rather than qualities that belong to our partner. This ongoing work of projection and withdrawal creates a spiral dynamic in conscious relationship. We project, we recognize the projection, we withdraw it, and integrate what it has taught us about ourselves, and then we project again at a deeper level. Each cycle of this process brings us into relationship with more subtle aspects of our own psyche, and allows us to see our partner more clearly as their own autonomous being rather than as a carrier of our unconscious contents. The eternal return also reveals that conflict in conscious relationship serves a different function than conflict in unconscious relationship. Where unconscious conflict typically involves each partner trying to change the other, to make them conform to unconscious expectations and projections, conscious conflict becomes a creative tension that generates new possibilities for both individual growth and relational depth. In conscious relationship, we learn to fight for the relationship rather than against each other. We develop the capacity to engage conflict as an opportunity to understand ourselves and our partner more deeply, to articulate needs and boundaries more clearly, to create new agreements that honor the growth and change that is constantly occurring in both individuals. Conflict becomes a form of intimacy rather than a threat to it, a way of remaining real with each other rather than slipping into the comfortable but ultimately deadening patterns of unexamined harmony. This transformation of conflict requires enormous psychological maturity and spiritual courage. It asks us to remain vulnerable when every instinct screams for protection, to stay curious when we want to be right, to seek understanding when we crave validation. It demands that we develop the capacity to regulate our own emotional states rather than expecting our partner to manage our feelings for us, and that we learn to speak our truth without making our partner responsible for how they receive it. The eternal return teaches us that love is not a feeling that we fall into or out of, but a choice that we make continuously. The emotions associated with love, passion, tenderness, desire, affection, may fluctuate based on circumstances, stress, levels, health, external pressures, and the natural rhythms of intimate relationship. But love itself, understood as the conscious choice to remain present, open, and committed to the growth and well-being of another being, transcends these emotional fluctuations. This distinction between love as feeling and love as choice becomes crucial during the inevitable periods in long-term relationship when the emotional experience of love feels absent or muted. In unconscious relationship, these periods are often interpreted as signs that love has died, that the relationship has run its course, that it is time to seek renewal through a new partner. But in conscious relationship, these periods are recognized as opportunities to deepen love beyond its emotional expressions, to discover what remains when the initial passion has subsided and the comfortable intimacy of routine has not yet developed. These desert periods in relationship, when love must be practiced rather than felt, chosen rather than experienced, often become the crucible in which authentic love is forged. They strip away the illusions and projections that may have sustained the relationship in its earlier phases and demand that we meet our partner and ourselves with stark honesty. They ask us to discover whether our commitment extends beyond feeling good, whether our intimacy can survive the absence of constant emotional reward, whether our love serves something greater than our own need for comfort and validation. The eternal return reveals that conscious relationship serves not just the two people involved, but the evolution of consciousness itself. When two beings choose to remain present with each other through all the cycles of projection and withdrawal, shadow revelation and integration, conflict and resolution, passion and routine, they create a field of consciousness that extends beyond their individual awareness. They become participants in what Jung recognized as the collective individuation process, the slow evolution of human consciousness toward greater awareness, authenticity, and compassion. This service to the evolution of consciousness transforms relationship from a private affair between two people into a sacred work that benefits not only the couple, but all those whose lives they touch. Children raised by parents who practice conscious relationship learn to navigate intimacy without losing themselves, to express authenticity without destroying connection, to engage conflict creatively rather than destructively. Friends and colleagues, witness the possibility of mature love and carry that vision into their own relationships. The ripple effects of conscious relationship extend far beyond the couple themselves, contributing to the collective growth in humanity's capacity for love. The eternal return ultimately reveals that the work of love is the work of consciousness itself, the ongoing choice to remain awake rather than fall asleep, to stay present rather than retreat into fantasy or projection, to grow rather than stagnate. In this light, every challenge in relationship becomes an opportunity, every conflict a teacher, every moment of choosing love over fear, a contribution to the evolution of human consciousness toward its highest potential. This is the gift and the demand of conscious relationship. It never allows us to rest in unconsciousness, never permits us to remain static in our development, never accepts less than our fullest presence and most authentic expression. It asks everything of us and gives everything in return, not the easy comfort of unconscious merger, but the difficult joy of conscious love that serves something infinitely greater than our individual needs and desires. In the eternal return, we discover that love is not something we achieve, but something we participate in, not a destination we reach, but a path we walk, not a problem we solve, but a mystery we enter ever more deeply, spiraling always toward greater consciousness, greater authenticity, greater service to the sacred principle of love that moves through all existence and calls all beings toward their highest possible expression of what it means to be human. YouTube. Description. Why do we find ourselves trapped in cycles of unfulfilling relationships, always seeking love but never quite finding it? Carl Jung revealed a startling truth. We fall in love not with another person, but with our own unconscious projections, the hidden aspects of ourselves we've never dared to embrace. In this exploration of Jung's revolutionary insights on love and relationship, we uncover how the persona, our carefully crafted social mask, becomes the primary obstacle to authentic intimacy. We examine how the Anima and Animus, those powerful inner figures Jung identified as our contrasexual aspects, get projected onto our romantic partners, creating the illusion of perfect love while keeping us strangers to both ourselves and our beloved. This isn't about finding the right person. It's about dismantling the elaborate theater of false identity we bring to every relationship. Jung understood that until we reclaim the projections we cast upon others and integrate our own shadow material, we remain trapped in what he called unconscious relationship, loving fantasies rather than human beings. The path to real love begins with the courage to remove the hollow crown of persona and meet another soul in the raw authenticity of our complete being, light and shadow unified. Only then can we love and be loved for who we truly are. What projections have you discovered in your own relationships? Share your insights below. Hashtags: Carl Jung, Jungian psychology; Anima Animus, shadow work; Individuation, job projection, chakra persona mask; Unconscious relationship, psychological projection, authentic love.